Syria is engulfed by a new wave of violence and unrest. Uncertainty looms ahead as questions arise over its ability to achieve peace and stability in the foreseeable future. Armed clashes in the coastal regions leave hundreds dead as Israel simultaneously resumes its illegal expansionist land grab in the south, thus further violating Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. A comprehensive political process that secures Syria's stability and enables it to tackle deep-rooted security challenges remains elusive and fraught with complexities. Syria managed to find its path to sustain national harmony, or will violence and turmoil persist in this ancient land? Welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming hinged.
French Le Monde has reported that Syria's transitional government faces a critical challenge after deadly clashes erupted in the Alawite stronghold of Latakia and Tartus. Following an ambush on March 7th by Assad loyalists, the authorities deployed thousands of troops to quell the violence. The conflict spread rapidly, with both regime militias and government forces clashing in towns and villages, resulting in numerous casualties, including civilians. Despite claims of military restraint, there were widespread reports of executions, abuse, further heightening tensions. The violence has raised concerns about the potential for war crimes. President Ahmed al-Shara addressed the nation, vowing justice for the bloodshed, while urging calm and military discipline. As ethnic tensions grow, the delicate balance to prevent further division and secure peace amidst the ongoing chaos. According to Asharq al-Awsat, Syria's President Ahmed al-Shara described the ongoing clashes between new government forces as part of expected challenges. He emphasized the need for national unity amid escalating violence. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported 1,000 deaths from 2 days of fighting in coastal areas, including civilians, security forces, and Assad's fighters. Government forces have regained control of much of the region, while authorities work to restore stability. The president urged the former regime fighters to surrender weapons and called on his supporters to avoid harming civilians, stressing the importance of ethical conduct in the face of provocation. As Syria faces mounting security challenges and fragile economy, the future of its sovereignty and stability hinges on navigating internal divisions and external threats. Can the nation restore the peace?
Syria, still grappling with the devastating effects of a prolonged conflict, stands the nation escalating security threats from both external and internal sources, raising the question, can Syria overcome its security challenges and restore stability? With national institutions under pressure, the future of Syria's sovereignty hangs in the balance. The Syrian government has been steadfast in its efforts to restore control and stability. There are mounting threats, particularly from Israel, which have escalated operations in southern Syria. Syria's institutions continue to play a crucial role in maintaining national unity. These operations undermine Syria's sovereignty and hinder efforts to stabilize the region. Economically, the situation is dire. sanctions, infrastructure collapse, and severe shortages affecting daily life. The Syrian people face immense hardships, and the need for international support is critical. However, ensuring aid reaches the people without deepening political divides remains a significant challenge. Syria's recent re-engagement with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, marks a significant diplomatic shift. This move could open avenues for economic and political support, though challenges persist, in particular the effects of Western sanctions. The most urgent need is an inclusive political process that guarantees the participation and rights of all Syrians. A comprehensive solution requires dialogue among all parties and commitment to national unity. The path to stability is fraught with challenges, but with inclusive political reform and international cooperation, Syria can overcome its crises and secure a peaceful, prosperous future.
To provide more analysis on the most recent updates concerning the current situation in Syria, we're joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations specialist, and Dr. Nurhain Sheikh, a political science professor. Thank you both for joining us here on Think Tank. Thank you so much. Let's start off with Dr. Osman. In light of the latest wave of violence and unrest that's taking place on the Syrian coast, in your view, what seems to be the root cause that's fueling these developments in Syria?
Thank you for having me. Unfortunately, the situation we are facing in Syria now is a natural result of the political course of action that the country has taken since the fall of the Assad regime and how the transitional period has been managed by the new Syrian authorities under the leadership of the transitional President Ahmed al-Shara. The political process has been unable to be inclusive to the extent that it includes each and every segment of Syrian society. Many segments feel that they are left out among ethnic and religious minorities, primarily minorities like the Kurds in the east and the Alawites in the west, in the coastal area. This is the area, of course, that has witnessed the latest wave of violence. And this exclusion has led to, and of course, in addition to admonishing the Alawite sect as being remnants of the old regime, even though they constitute about 10 to 12% of the Alawite population, of the Syrian population, of course, this has caused great disquiet and tensions within the Syrian coast, and it actually led to armed attacks undertaken by several armed groups that come from this Syrian denomination, which of course led to a backlash and a wave of retaliatory attacks that have turned into a proverbial bloodbath in the Syrian coast. So far, over 750 civilians have been massacred in cold blood within the span of less than 48 hours. And of course, this is very, very alarming because it actually signifies that Syria is on its way back to ethnic and sectarian violence.
Which kind of brings on the next idea, Dr. Osman. I mean, do you believe that what's happening right now in Syria may lead to further violence and further escalations? Because you were talking about the idea that some groups or factions within Syria feel like they've been left out of the political process. Does this mean that we could see a resurgence of the violence we've seen in the last few years?
Yes, that's a possibility unless the current Syrian government re-engages the entirety of the Syrian population, all of the factions representing the groups within Syrian society, a political transition that is inclusive, that establishes a Syrian state based on the principles of rule of law, citizenship, and equality. However, if a state will be established on the basis of exclusion and Islamic extremism, to be completely honest with you, this form of fundamentalism, of course it will lead Syria back into a bloodier wave of unrest and internal conflict. What we have seen in the Syrian coast, this could actually escalate to become a full-fledged campaign, even genocide. I think that President al-Shara is sending the right messages. He is sending conciliatory messages. The Syrian government has pledged to hold accountable all of the elements that have undertaken crimes and violations against the civilian population in the Syrian coast. I think these are the right messages. However, they need to be backed up by meaningful measures and actual reforms that can lead to a position that reflects the aspirations of the Syrian population at large.
Okay, Dr. Nurhan, I don't know if you got what Dr. Osman was talking about. He discussed the idea of the escalation and violence and so forth, and how this could become a resurgence of what we saw in Syria in the past years. How do you assess the measures that have been taken so far by the transitional government to curb the latest wave of unrest? And in your opinion, do you believe that we may see a resurgence of violence, as Dr. Osman said, that is a possibility?
Good morning for you, Rehan, and for all our program. A measure has been taken on domestic level and even from outside powers at the states those are interested in Syria. I think they are not enough. Domestically, I think the top priority.
But issue when it comes to sound. So back to you, Dr. Osman, so we can sort of fix that. Dr. Osman, in light of the economic challenges that Syria is currently facing, will the latest round of violence in Latakia and other coastal areas complicate efforts when it comes to lifting Western sanctions and getting Syria's economic aid back in and trying or attempting to have a recovery when it comes to the Syrian economy?
Of course, it places all of the Western powers and even other imported nations in a very precarious position, because now the European Union has been lifting sanctions. The U.S. has been considering lifting more sanctions and has been easing sanctions and is now considering even lifting them by canceling the so-called Caesars Act, which Congress has issued that imposed very stringent sanctions on the previous Syrian regime. So now these governments will be faced with the conundrum of how will they be able to lift the rest of the sanctions and also provide economic aid and potentially economic investment in a country that does not uphold basic human rights and basic liberties, as demonstrated by the very unhinged acts of violence that have been undertaken by various militants and armed factions that are affiliated with the new Syrian government. So, of course, it places them in a very, very tough predicament, and it might actually impede all the efforts undertaken by the Syrian government in order to lobby for the lifting or at least the easing of sanctions. That might put a stop to it. And also, it's not only in the West. For example, the current transitional government has been engaged in a very long and arduous negotiation with Russia in order to allow the Russians to maintain their bases in the Syrian coast, in Hamaymim and Tartus. In exchange, the Russians would provide very generous economic aid and would also give debt relief to the Syrian government. However, now with this situation going on the Syrian coast, it places Russia in a very tough predicament where they might be very reluctant to provide economic aid and support to the current government, given that actually many of the local inhabitants, about 7,000 of the inhabitants, have fled their villages in the northern coastal areas, and they fled and took refuge inside the Hamaymim air base under the protection of the Russian military. Yes. Of course, this embarrasses Russia in a way or the other. So as you can see, both East and West, the Russians, the Americans, the Europeans, and even the Arab countries might be placed in a very tough predicament if such acts of heinous violence persist. And again, I think that the Syrian government seeks to curb the current wave of violence. I think that there are uncontrollable elements within the factions that are affiliated with the government that have undertaken these acts of wanton violence. Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
I apologize for cutting you off there, but we have Dr. Nourhan al-Sheikh back again on with us on Think Tank, but over the phone right now. Dr. Nourhan, I don't know if you got to what Dr. Osman was talking about the escalation in violence and how this could be an issue when it comes to the economy, but there are a lot of other factors as well that will affect the Syrian country and the government as well. In your opinion, how do you assess the measures that have been taken so far by the transitional government to curb the latest wave of unrest? And do you think that they will be able to restore calm in the areas that are facing violence, or will we see some sort of escalation and what we've seen in years before in Syria?
I think that the procedures are not enough at all, because the top priority of the Syrian people is the economic situation.
Yes.
Up to the days, there is no any sign to improvement of economic standard of life, the service and accommodation introduced to the people. I think, as far as I hear from some Syrians, that the situation it is much worse than before. I'm talking about the economic one. Plus, the second priority for the people is security, and this is also a dilemma in Syria up to the date. There is no full security for all. Plus, that sectarian and that which is also giving some kind of social inequalities, social injustice. There is no guarantee for anybody from other sectarians who were by way or another involved in fighting. Any civil war, by the way, people are involved in fighting each other. But whenever we decide to end the war and to start or to begin a new phase or a new era, we should be tolerant another. But up to the date, that tolerance not for all Syrians. I think what happened Syrian matter, but it is a more economic and social issue. Many hundreds and thousands of those who were served in the old regime suddenly be fired and has no income to accommodate and to feed themselves and their families, etc. So what we expect from them? We should understand the motives, all motives, to be able to handle and give some solution. It is not only the political matter or sectarian matter, but there are socio-economic factors that push them to do so. Plus, what I think Dr. Osman mentioned, the political process is not integrating for all Syrians. Up to the date, many Syrians find themselves out of the process. And they have a lot of doubts about what will happen. Because if they are not integrated, their interests would be not represented. So the outcome shouldn't be satisfied, or what they dream of, or what they want. So I think the government should handle a lot to guarantee stability, to guarantee a place for all Syrian, and that's
so your belief is basically that the government needs to do more, that they're not doing enough to contain what's happening.
I doubt that it can do more, because they have their own problems. You know, it's not Hayat Tahrir Sham only. We have many other groups who are involved, having arms, have their command up to the date. Although they declared that they have one army, etc., but up to the date, the militia, by a way or another, is still under its command, and that I think a big challenge for the new government, because it's inside the challenge. It is from inside the government itself, or the new administration itself.
Okay, Dr. Osman, I'm not sure if you got what Dr. Nurhan said, but she talked about the idea that it's not just about, the different factions vying for power or people being excluded or not. There's also internal strife within the government and the groups that have been controlling Syria right now. Do you believe that this will further increase the tensions and the violence and destabilize Syria's territorial integrity in general? And especially with Israel attempting to, go for a land grab as well.
I agree entirely with what Dr. Nurhan said, because she basically described the current condition of the Syrian government, which is far from cohesive and very, very close to fragmentation in terms of maintaining a standing army and a standing security force. What they call the army and the general security and these other institutions that they claim exist on paper are basically factions, armed factions and militias, and most of them are jihadists from a jihadist background. So, and they're not exclusively from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And of course, this creates an actual problem because they still maintain their military hierarchy and command, as Dr. Nurhan said, within autonomous militias. And this explains the pandemonium that we saw on the past couple of days, and today even. The violence, by the way, is still ongoing on the Syrian coast at a very alarming rate. So I think this is a problem, and I think that they are unable to control all of the elements of what they call their own army. And I think this was a huge, now they are paying a price for the huge mistake of disbanding the Syrian National Army after the fall of the Syrian government. And this brings me to the Israeli issue. One of the main consequences of the disbanding of Syria's national army that has existed since 1925 is the repeated Israeli incursions into southern Syria. Now they have managed to occupy the buffer zone that has been maintained since the disengagement, the agreement of 1974, and now they are going beyond occupying Jabal al-Sheikh, occupying parts of even the countryside of Daraa and Damascus, and now they are trying to sow internal divisions inside Syria by trying to ignite sectarian violence in the south between the Druze and the Sunnis. That's what the Israelis are doing right now. And of course, in addition to that, the Israelis have undertaken a massive air campaign that basically took out the remaining military infrastructure of the previous military. And the current government did nothing to stop the Israelis. So now, of course, the Israelis are taking advantage of the instability in Syria and the internal divisions in order to expand their land grab and further their occupation of Syrian lands. And of course, Netanyahu needs, of course, as an escape strategy to escape his failures in Gaza, where he is unable to achieve any meaningful results by trying to occupy more Syrian land and at the expense of the Syrian people.
Dr. Osman, if we could also get one last answer in from Dr. Nurhan, because we're out of time, almost out of time. Dr. Nurhan, given the recent National Dialogue Conference and a roadmap that has been set up when it comes to the political transition, in addition to the possibility of institutional reforms in Syria, does the recent violence that took place in the coastal provinces concern the Syrian government when it comes to the transition, and does this option of a transition become viable when it comes to the violence that's taking place right now?
I think there are many challenges for stability in Syria, and we still far behind reaching such total stability, because I think the process itself is not inclusion; it is exclusive process. And that will create more and more problem and unfortunately more violence. We all hope that Syrian state would be stable, because it is connected to our national security in Egypt and in the whole Arab world. But unfortunately, all givings and signs from reality and on the ground, it is not. It is not. I think it's not going in such direction.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the violence may be repeated by aware or not.
Yes, well, thank you so much for joining us, both of you. That was Dr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations specialist, and Dr. Nurhan Sheikh, a political science professor. Thank you both for your insights, and thank you for joining us here on Think Tank. As Syria faces deepening unrest and escalating violence, the path to stability remains fraught with challenges. Will the country find unity and peace amidst such turmoil, or will its divisions deepen further? Only time will tell. But unfortunately, this brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.